Welcome to Mystery Frontier, where every shadow holds a secret. I am your guide through the darkest corners of our world. And today, our journey takes us to Japan, deep within the ancient city of Kyoto. For over 1,000 years, Kyoto served as the heart of the Japanese Empire. But beneath its temples, behind its traditional facades, and within its ancient forests, something far more sinister lurks. They whisper instead, always looking over their shoulders, always careful not to disturb what should remain undisturbed. But tonight, we break that silence. These are not the harmless raccoon dogs tourists photograph. These are ancient beings with the power to alter reality itself. This is not just a cultural jewel. This is a city where the living and the dead exist in an uneasy balance. The back seat was empty. Only a puddle of murky water remained, smelling of earth and decay. The locals here don't speak openly about what they've seen. Our first stop takes us to the foothills of Mount Inari, where for centuries, the people of Kyoto have reported encounters with the tanuki, creatures that exist between the world of animals and spirits. But guardians of what, exactly? Local shrine keepers speak of periods when the boundary between life and death grows thin. During these times, they say, the tanuki become more active, more desperate. They're not playing tricks, they're issuing warnings. In 1987, a taxi driver named Hiroshi Yamamoto picked up what he thought was an elderly woman near Fushimi Inari Shrine at 2A Inari Shrine. Inside these tunnels, they found dozens of small clay figurines arranged in perfect circles. Each figurine was carved to resemble a different person, and every single one matched the description of missing persons reported in Kyoto over the past century. She was dressed in traditional kimono, soaking wet from rain that hadn't fallen that night. The figurines were never seen again. When she finally spoke weeks later, her account defied everything we understand about the shrine's layout. During the 20-minute drive, she spoke only once. The mountain remembers everything. They moved in perfect silence, their feet never quite touching the ground. The temperature dropped with each step until her breath came out in visible clouds. The silence was absolute. No insects, no wind, no sound except the whisper of fabric as the spirits moved through the gates. Each one paused at a different gate, touching the inscribed name before vanishing into the wood. It was ancient, carved from black wood, and bore no inscription. Instead, it was covered in what looked like scratch marks, as if something had been desperately trying to claw its way out. What had been a path with roughly 10,000 gates became an endless tunnel stretching impossibly deep into the mountain. But shrine keepers began reporting something disturbing. Visitors who entered the gate tunnel at dusk would sometimes emerge, speaking about a black gate with scratch marks, a gate that filled them with inexplicable terror. The extra gate bore no inscription and showed signs of extreme age that didn't match any records. It was quietly removed during the night. When she turned around, the endless tunnel had returned to normal, of scratch marks appearing on their bedroom doors each morning. As they lifted the main crossbeam, they discovered something carved into the wood beneath. Hundreds of names, scratched in desperate, uneven characters. Every single name matched a person who had gone missing on Mount Inari over the past 400 years. They know that some numbers lie, and some gates exist only when the mountain decides they should be seen. The spirits were gone. She was alone in a familiar shrine with exactly 10,000 gates. The inscribed names on each gate began to glow with a pale, cold light, and she realized that she was no longer alone. Passengers who shouldn't exist, destinations that led nowhere, and always that smell of earth and decay lingering long after the encounter ended. But what tourists don't know is that these gates weren't built just for worship. They were built as a barrier. According to shrine records dating back to 1499, every gate must be consecrated with a ritual that binds it to the others. Break this chain, they believe, and something far more dangerous than tourists will descend the mountain. The shape-shifting spirits of Mount Inari local police records, though rarely discussed publicly, document over 200 similar encounters since 1960. He told me something that still chills me to this day. The tanuki don't just shapeshift their own forms. They reshape reality around them. What people see, what they experience, it's all real in that moment. The question isn't whether these encounters happened. She entered the gate tunnel at sunset and planned to photograph the interplay of moonlight and shadow through the wooden structures. The question is what the spirits want people to remember. Each follows the same pattern. A passenger who shouldn't exist, arriving at places that no longer stand, leaving behind only traces of something that defies explanation. When Yamamoto arrived at her destination, a cemetery that had been demolished 50 years earlier, he turned to collect his fare. But Yamamoto's experience was not unique. Dr. Kenji Nakamura, a folklore researcher at Kyoto University, spent 30 years collecting these testimonies. In traditional belief, tanuki serve as guardians between worlds. The most disturbing account comes from 2003, when construction workers preparing to expand a parking lot near the shrine discovered a series of tunnels that didn't appear on any historical maps. The tunnels were sealed by city officials within 48 hours. But the workers who found them began experiencing the same phenomenon as the taxi drivers. The 1,000 Gates of the Dead. The Fushimi Inari Shrine draws millions of visitors each year, all drawn to walk through the famous tunnel of vermilion torii gates that wind up the mountainside. Each torii gate is inscribed with the name of its donor, creating what local priests call a chain of souls. In 1976, a young photographer named Akiko Sato decided to capture the shrine at night when no tourists crowded the pathways. Sato was found 3 days later at the very top of the mountain, alive but in a catatonic state. She claimed that as darkness fell, the gates began to multiply. They walked beside me, Sato recalled. Thousands of them, all in traditional dress from different time periods. Sato followed this procession for what felt like hours, deeper into a version of the shrine that shouldn't exist. At what she thought was the end of the tunnel, Sato found a gate unlike the others. That's when she heard the voice. Turn back, child of the living world. Some boundaries must not be crossed. The voice came from everywhere and nowhere, speaking in a dialect of Japanese so archaic that Sato later needed scholars to translate what she had heard. But the Black Gate had followed her back. For the next 30 years, Sato returned to Fushimi Inari every month, searching for that impossible gate. She never found it in the daylight. In 2006, shrine authorities commissioned a complete survey of every gate on the mountain. They found 10,001 gates. The removal team worked by lamplight, carefully dismantling the gate piece by piece. The gate was cremated immediately, but the removal team reported the same experience for months afterward. Dreams of walking through endless tunnels, of voices calling their names from within the wood. The shrine maintains that only 10,000 gates exist on Mount Inari, but locals know better. The Well of Souls at Rokudo Shinoji, in the Higashiyama district of Kyoto, stands Rokudo Shinoji Temple, home to one of Japan's most feared spiritual sites. A well that locals believe connects directly to the realm of the dead. This is not folklore passed down through generations of storytelling. This is a present, active threat that the people of Kyoto navigate around every single day. The temple's name translates to 6 realms crossroads, referring to the Buddhist concept of 6 states of existence. But the monks who tend this temple know that the 6 realms are not metaphorical here. According to temple records, Takamura would descend into the well each night and return each morning with messages from deceased family members, lost love letters from beyond the grave, and warnings about disasters that had not yet occurred. They are literal destinations accessible through a stone well that sits in the temple's courtyard, covered by a wooden lid that has not been opened in over 400 years. The well's history begins in the 12th century with a monk named Ono no Takamura, who claimed he could travel between the world of the living and the world of the dead. He spent roughly 10 minutes near the well, taking photographs and reading the historical plaques. The 15th is not your day to travel. That night, in his hotel room, Morrison was awakened by his grandmother, who had died 15 years earlier. He initially dismissed the dream as jet lag-induced hallucination, but the dream repeated for 3 consecutive nights, each time with his grandmother providing more specific details about a crash that would kill everyone aboard. But Takamura's supernatural postal service came with a price. People who spend time near the covered well begin experiencing what medical professionals cannot adequately explain. They start receiving visits from deceased relatives in their dreams, but these are not comforting reunions. These departed family members arrive with urgent warnings about the dreamer's own impending death, providing specific dates and circumstances with disturbing accuracy. Each follows the same pattern: brief exposure to the well's vicinity, followed by dreams featuring deceased relatives delivering warnings that prove devastatingly accurate. Each time he returned from the well, he brought something back with him, something that had no business in the world of the living. They often returned multiple times, sometimes across several years, always asking the same questions, always trying to convince the monks that the well should be open for research purposes or to help lost souls. They speak of Takamura as if they knew him personally, the same family names appearing again and again across centuries, as if something is drawing their descendants back to this place. They ask detailed questions about the sealing ritual, about whether the well connects to other similar sites around the world. These guards report the same phenomena that have persisted for centuries: voices from underground calling out names, temperature drops that can freeze water in seconds, and most disturbing of all, the sound of something large moving beneath the wooden cover, as if the well extends far deeper than any natural excavation should reach. According to every recorded testimony, the deceased relatives all deliver the same warning: do not let them open the well. Some doors should never be unlocked. The first signs appeared as temperature anomalies around the temple: wind patterns, bamboo movement, occasional wildlife, all completely normal. But the nighttime recordings captured something that shouldn't be possible. Her team installed sensitive recording equipment throughout the grove and monitored audio patterns during both day and nighttime hours. They seemed to emanate from the bamboo itself, as if the plants were somehow generating human speech. The conversations consistently focused on court intrigues, political assassinations, and hidden burial sites within the forest, all referencing historical events that were accurate but had never been publicly documented. The voices were discussing events that had occurred in Kyoto during the Heian period, over 800 years ago. During daylight hours, the forest produces the soft, musical sound of bamboo swaying in the wind, a sound so beautiful it has been designated as one of Japan's 100 soundscapes to be preserved. And the reason for his visit to Kyoto, details that no one else could have known. They spoke of him as if he were a character in their ancient court drama, debating whether his presence in the forest would affect some long-forgotten political scheme. During these periods, they claim, visitors to the forest don't simply hear voices. They become part of the conversations, pulled into discussions about court politics and ancient grudges that died centuries ago. The conversations had followed them home, continuing in their apartments, their cars, their offices, always discussing the same ancient intrigues as if the modern world did not exist. The voices were discussing modern visitors to the forest, describing their appearance, their behavior, and most unsettling of all, their personal histories with accuracy that should have been impossible. As if they are still living in the 12th century, still concerned about threats and secrets from a world that no longer exists. But sealing something is not the same as destroying it, and the monks who made this decision learned that some doorways cannot be permanently closed. These are not echoes of daytime visitors or sounds carrying from nearby areas. These are distinct, purposeful conversations that stop abruptly when the listener tries to approach their source. Visitors reported sudden, inexplicable drops in temperature that left frost on surfaces even during summer months. Then came the whispers, voices calling out from underground, speaking names of people who were still alive, but addressing them as if they were long dead. By 1185, the situation had become dangerous enough that the temple sealed the well. Modern encounters with the well's influence follow a pattern that has remained consistent for 8 centuries. In 1992, a tourist named James Morrison from Seattle visited Rokudo Shinoji as part of a temple tour. "Jimmy," she said, standing at the foot of his bed in the same dress she had been buried in, "you need to cancel your flight home." Morrison's flight was scheduled for October 15th. On October 13th, Morrison changed his flight to the 16th. Flight 142. The flight Morrison was originally scheduled to take experienced catastrophic engine failure during takeoff and crashed, killing all 127 people aboard. Morrison's experience would be remarkable if it were isolated, but temple records document over 50 similar cases in the past century. The most disturbing aspect of these encounters is what the visiting spirits consistently say about the well itself. Who they are remains unclear, but in 2018, the temple's head monk, Master Yamada, shared something with me that he had never told anyone outside his immediate religious circle. Every few years, he said, someone comes to the temple specifically asking about the well. They always know more about it than they should. Master Yamada described these visitors as having an unnatural intensity, an urgency that seemed to consume him entirely. "We keep records of these visitors," Master Yamada continued. "What troubles us most is that many of them share the same surname as people who disappeared near the well during Takamura's time. The temple maintains 24-hour guards around the well, though they don't advertise this fact. The whispers in the bamboo forest, the Sagano bamboo forest, one of Kyoto's most photographed locations, harbors an acoustic phenomenon that scientists cannot explain and locals refuse to discuss openly. But after dark, the bamboo forest speaks in different voices. Since the 1960s, visitors who have entered the forest after sunset report hearing conversations in languages they cannot identify, spoken by voices that seem to move independently through the bamboo groves. Dr. Yuki Tanaka, an acoustic engineer from Tokyo University, spent 2 years studying the forest's sound properties. "The daytime recordings matched our expectations perfectly," Dr. Tanaka explained. "The equipment detected conversation-like sound patterns that occurred in perfect acoustic isolation, meaning the voices had no identifiable source point." More disturbing was the content analysis. When Dr. Tanaka's team analyzed the recorded conversations using language identification software, they found fragments of dialects that predated modern Japanese by several centuries. Local historians familiar with Dr. Tanaka's research provided translations of some recorded fragments. "They speak as if these events happened yesterday," one historian noted. But the most chilling discovery came when Dr. Tanaka's team realized that the conversations were not simply replaying historical events. In one recorded conversation, the voices discussed a tourist who had visited that afternoon, correctly naming his hometown, his profession. The recordings revealed one final disturbing pattern. The voices consistently expressed concern about something they called the awakening time, a period when the forest's normal barriers would weaken, allowing them to affect events in the physical world. According to the conversations, this awakening occurs every few decades and is triggered by specific astronomical alignments. Dr. Tanaka's research was discontinued after team members began reporting that they could hear the voices even when they weren't in the forest. The recording equipment was removed, but forest guards report that tourists still occasionally emerge from nighttime visits speaking in archaic Japanese, confused about the current date, asking about political figures who died 800 years ago. The living dolls of Kyoto's doll shops in the traditional districts of Kyoto Centuries-old doll shops line narrow streets, their windows filled with exquisite handcrafted figures dressed in elaborate kimonos. These are not toys. They are works of art, some worth tens of thousands of dollars, created by master craftsmen whose families have practiced this trade for generations. According to Japanese tradition, these dolls can house the spirits of children who died young, becoming vessels for souls seeking comfort in the physical world. The current owner, Kenji Matsuda, represents the 13th generation of his family to run the shop. We thought she was simply disturbed, but then other customers began reporting similar experiences. And he maintains detailed records of what he calls active dolls, pieces that display behavior inconsistent with inanimate objects. Within a week, the child began having conversations with the doll, speaking to it as if it were responding. When questioned, she insisted that Yuki-chan, the doll, had told her these things during their nighttime talks. The parents initially dismissed this as normal imaginative play until they overheard their daughter's side of these conversations. She would set places at the dinner table for her invisible friend and carry on conversations with empty air. This behavior continued for 6 months until the family moved away from Kyoto entirely. Created in 1952 by master craftsman Hiroshi Suzuki, this particular Ekimatsu doll was considered too realistic, too lifelike for customers. Its glass eyes seemed to follow movement with uncanny precision, and its expression appeared to change subtly depending on the viewer's angle. Even when the shop is empty, even when I'm the only one here, I can sense that it's occupied. Other dolls in its vicinity seem more active, more responsive. Customers often comment on feeling watched while browsing, and children who visit the shop consistently gravitate toward this particular doll, speaking to it in hushed tones as if sharing secrets. Sometimes I catch myself speaking to it as if it were a real child who needed comfort. But several of these shops harbor a secret that their owners discuss only in whispers. Some of their dolls are not entirely inanimate. Their only official statement was that some investigations should not be pursued further. Security cameras installed to monitor the shop captured footage that defied explanation. Dolls in the storage room, moving independently, changing positions. The dolls, crafted with such care and attention to realistic detail, provide perfect vessels for these lonely souls, where even the bravest locals hesitate to wander after dark. Other traditional doll shops throughout the city have begun reporting similar incidents with increasing frequency, but not in a comforting way. But this progress came at a terrible price. The laborers who built the tunnel were forced to work under brutal, almost inhumane conditions. Many of them were prisoners or people from marginalized communities, treated as expendable. But beneath the cracked concrete, beneath the damp walls, lie decades of pain, fear, and death. Dolls that move, dolls that seem aware, dolls that somehow attract the spirits of children who died before their time. Their instruments detected significant energy fluctuations around the doll that couldn't be attributed to electrical sources or temperature variations. Some say that when a worker died, the project leaders, eager to avoid delays, would bury the body within the tunnel walls, sealing the dead with the stone, ensuring their screams were silenced forever. During the day, the tunnel measures 444 meters, a number that's unsettling in itself. As if the road becomes endless, an infinite loop designed to trap the souls of the living alongside the dead. In Japanese, the number 4 is pronounced shi, which is also the word for death. The experience can be nightmarish. Some hear soft whispers, voices speaking in old Japanese dialects that no one fully understands. Others hear footsteps, faint, shuffling sounds that grow louder ... and closer. She was quiet, dressed in white, and asked to be taken through the tunnel. But halfway through, she simply vanished from the back seat, gone, as if she was never there. Some even report their equipment malfunctioning or batteries draining inexplicably fast. A place where the boundary between life and death is paper thin. Most remarkably, their audio equipment picked up what sounded like a young girl humming softly, even though no children were present in the shop. They understand that in a city where the boundaries between worlds remain thin, even the most beautiful art can become a doorway for something that should remain at rest. When they turn to look behind them, nothing is there. But the chill remains. But none have successfully explained the apparitions, or why so many unrelated witnesses report seeing the same ghostly samurai. That the dead were still there, trapped between worlds, and that the structure itself somehow alive. Drivers have described the scene with eerie consistency. As they enter the tunnel, they see a tall figure clad in ancient armor, standing perfectly still, his katana resting by his side. His face is obscured, but his presence feels heavy, oppressive, as though he's guarding something. But ask the locals, and many will tell you they'd rather take a longer route than cross Kiyotaki at night. And in one instance, a small Ijumatsu doll, appearing to play with others, moving them around in what looked like a children's tea party, as if he was never there, leaving behind a freezing cold that chills to the bone, even on a summer night. The phenomenon centers around a particular type of doll called Ishimatsu Ningyo, realistic child dolls with glass eyes and human hair. Appeared in different rooms from where they were placed, or most disturbing of all, seemed to watch people with tracking eye movements that followed visitors around the room. According to his notes, preserved in the shop's archives, he had been grieving the loss of his own young daughter when he crafted this doll. He claimed that he had unconsciously poured his sorrow into the work, creating something that captured not just the appearance of childhood, but the essence of a specific child as spirit. Matsuda Doll Shop, established in 1673, has documented the most extensive collection of unexplained incidents. Customers frequently inquire about purchasing it, drawn to its extraordinary craftsmanship, but Matsuda refuses all offers. My great-grandfather started keeping the records after a customer returned a doll, claiming it had been moving around her house at night, Matsuda explained. The shop's records document over 300 cases. Since 1890 of customers are reporting that their purchased dolls had changed position overnight, but the incidents escalated beyond simple movement. In 1987, a family in the Nishiki district purchased an Echimatsu doll for their 7-year-old daughter. The child was providing detailed information about family finances, private parental discussions, and neighborhood gossip that she had no way of knowing. The family returned the doll to Matsuda's shop, but the child continued to speak about Yuki-chan as if the doll were still present. Matsuda placed the returned doll in his shop's back storage room, but employees began reporting that they could hear children's voices coming from the storage area after closing hours. The most disturbing case in Matsuda's records involves a doll that was never sold. Suzuki himself was disturbed by his creation. The doll has remained in Matsuda's shop for over 70 years, displayed in a place of honor, but never offered for sale. That doll has never been alone, he said. Shop employees report that the doll's presence affects the entire store. In 2019, a team of paranormal researchers requested permission to study the doll using electromagnetic field detectors and thermal imaging equipment. The researchers left after one night, refusing to discuss their findings publicly. But perhaps the most chilling aspect of Kyoto's doll phenomenon is its apparent expansion. Local spiritual advisors suggest that Kyoto's long history of tragedy, wars, famines, diseases that claimed countless young lives, has created an abundance of restless child spirits seeking connection with the physical world. The city's doll makers continue their ancient craft, but many now perform purification rituals before beginning work, hoping to prevent their creations from becoming too welcoming to otherworldly inhabitants. The cursed Kiyotaki Tunnel, Kyoto's road to the underworld. There is a place in Kyoto, hidden away from the bright temples and bustling streets. The place is known as Kiyotaki Tunnel, a narrow, winding passage carved through the hills west of Kyoto, in a forest that feels alive. On the surface, it looks like any other tunnel. To understand its curse, we must go back nearly a century, to the year 1927. The tunnel was constructed during Japan's rapid modernization. The working conditions were so harsh, accidents were frequent. Over time, rumors spread. Locals began whispering that the tunnel was cursed. And then the sightings began. One of the most infamous apparitions is that of a samurai ghost standing in the middle of the road within the tunnel. Some try to stop, others accelerate. But no matter what they do, the samurai vanishes ... But that's only one of the tunnel's sinister legends. It's also said that the length of the Kyoto tunnel changes. But some claim that when night falls, the tunnel stretches. That driving through it feels like time itself slows down. And for those unfortunate enough to break down or stop their cars inside the tunnel ... And then there are the mirrors. Drivers have reported looking in their rearview mirror and seeing an extra figure in the back seat. A shadowy form, just sitting there, unmoving, watching. A taxi driver once recounted picking up a woman late at night near the tunnel entrance. Even scientists and skeptics have attempted to debunk the tunnel's mysteries, suggesting explanations like acoustic illusions or drafts of wind that create the eerie sounds. Paranormal investigators who've dared to spend nights near the tunnel often speak of overwhelming dread, nausea, or sudden headaches, as if the air itself rejects their presence. And yet, the tunnel is still open. Cars still pass through every day. Because some believe the tunnel isn't just haunted. They believe it is a gateway to Yomi, the Japanese underworld. And if that boundary wears too thin, something might follow you home. So if you ever find yourself near Kyoto, and someone offers to show you the infamous Kyoto tunnel, think carefully before accepting. You might drive in alone ... But you can't be sure you'll be alone when you leave. The ghostly woman of Maruyama Park, Kyoto's silent watcher, a place where the past lives side by side with the present, where every alley, every temple, every garden seems to hold whispers of history, of romance, ... and of tragedy. But among its many famous locations, there is one place that carries an especially haunting reputation after sundown. Nestled near the heart of the Gion district, this park is celebrated for its spectacular cherry blossom trees. In spring, thousands of visitors gather beneath the sakura to witness the fleeting beauty of the blossoms. A time of laughter, of music, of shared joy. It's called Maruyama Park. Something else awakens. But when the crowds are gone, when night falls and the park grows quiet, for decades, locals and visitors alike have told the same story of a woman dressed in a pure white kimono, seen wandering silently under the ancient cherry trees, slowly. And in that moment, you might catch a glimpse of her face, pale, ethereal, with a slight, sorrowful smile. A smile that feels ... wrong. She carries a delicate parasol, shielding her face from view. No one knows where she comes from. She appears suddenly, often as the sun is setting or just after nightfall, gliding gracefully among the trees as if she belongs to another time. Disgraced and heartbroken, she is said to have taken her own life beneath the very cherry trees that bloom each spring, her spirit bound forever to the place where she last felt alive. A soul appointed by the gods or by fate itself to watch over Maruyama Park, ensuring that the delicate balance between the living and the dead is preserved. Those who disrespect the park, who vandalize or speak ill of its beauty, but nothing definitive, nothing clear enough to explain what's truly there, are said to feel her cold gaze upon them, a warning that the line between the world of the living and the world of spirits is thinner than we believe. A few bold, or perhaps foolish, visitors have called out to the woman, asking her who she is, why she's there. And according to the legends, she sometimes responds, and utterly destroyed, or the distinct feeling of being watched, as if eyes hidden behind a parasol are tracking their every move. She was said to be in love, deeply, passionately, with a man of noble birth. A man who promised her marriage, promised her a life beyond the stage and the fleeting pleasures of Jihan. They'll tell you the story of the geisha, of the woman in white, and they'll caution you. Some say that right before she fades, you can hear the faint sound of a shamisen, a traditional stringed instrument, playing a melancholy tune in the distance, and some spirits ... don't like to be disturbed, don't follow, and whatever you do, don't speak to her. A melody that lingers in your mind long after the woman is gone. The same patterns, the same warnings, the same inexplicable events repeating endlessly, as if Kyoto exists in a state of temporal suspension, where past and present occupy the same space. The city's ancient spirits, cursed wells, and impossible architecture exist alongside modern life, creating a reality where the supernatural and the mundane intersect every single day. Those who see her describe an overwhelming sense of sadness, as though the air itself grows heavier, soaked with a sorrow you can't quite explain. The truly brave have tried to follow her, but each time the result is the same. When you draw closer, she turns to face you, and then, before your very eyes. In Kyoto, the past is never truly past, and the dead are never truly gone. And what happens when someone finally decides that the mysteries of Kyoto should be fully explored, regardless of the consequences? Some even claim to have dreams of the woman, standing silently at the foot of their bed, her parasol open, obscuring her face, but her gaze felt deeply, intimately. A sound that starts soft but quickly grows distorted, echoing around the trees until it's impossible to tell where it's coming from. They know that some doors should never be opened, some conversations should never be joined, and some wells should never be unsealed. And then, silence. She disappears, vanishes completely, as if she was never there. But who is she? One of the most enduring legends claims that she was once a geisha, a highly skilled entertainer known for her grace, beauty, and artistry. But promises are fragile things. The man betrayed her, vanishing from her life and leaving her reputation in ruins. Another version of the tale paints her not as a victim, but as a guardian spirit. Visitors have reported strange sensations while walking the park paths alone at night. Sudden gusts of wind on a still evening, the smell of perfume with no source. Some have captured fleeting images on their cameras, blurry shapes, a flash of white in the distance, or strange lights that seem to form a figure just beyond the reach of the lens. And yet, the stories persist. Perhaps the most chilling accounts come from those who dared to speak to her, not with words, but with a slow, low laugh. The wind stops. The park grows still. And for the rest of the night, those who heard the laugh often report feeling an unshakable presence following them. Not just in the park, but all the way home. Skeptics say it's just a ghost story, that it's the power of suggestion, of the mind playing tricks on those who walk alone after dark. But ask the locals, ask the elderly residents who, they lived near the park all their lives, and you'll hear a different answer. If you see her, don't approach, because the dead have no need for conversation. So the next time you find yourself in Kyoto, admiring the cherry blossoms under a soft evening sky, remember, beauty can be deceiving. And in Maruyama Park, someone might be watching you from just beyond the trees. Kyoto's mysteries are not relics of the past. They are active, evolving phenomena that continue to shape the lives of everyone who encounters them. What makes these accounts particularly disturbing is their consistency across centuries. The people of Kyoto have learned to navigate these mysteries through careful avoidance, ritual respect, and an unspoken agreement never to disturb what should remain untouched. But as modernization continues and ancient warnings are forgotten, the question becomes, how long can these careful boundaries be maintained? The shadows of this ancient city hold secrets that have remained hidden for good reason. This is Mystery Frontier. The journey into darkness has only just begun.